The mahogany door clicked shut behind my assistant, and there they stood, my parents 7 years older, 7 years smaller than I remembered. My father's hands trembled around his hat. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. 7 years ago, they'd stood in our old kitchen and told me the house, the company, the name, all of it belonged to my brother now. He's the one who stayed, my father had said, as if loyalty were the only currency that mattered. I hadn't argued. I'd simply walked out, suitcase in hand, and let the door close on 26 years of trying to be enough. Now they were in my office. My name was on the glass behind me in gold letters. Outside the window, the city I'd conquered stretched out in the dying light. "We need your help," my mother whispered. I folded my hands and said nothing. Not yet. My name is Elena Voss. Growing up, I was the quiet one. The daughter who did well in school without being asked. Who fixed the family's tax problems at 16 because no one else could be bothered. Who never raised her voice because raising it never got me anywhere. My brother Marcus was the loud one, the charming one, the one photographs seemed to love. When he crashed the car, it was boys will be boys. When I got a scholarship, it was don't let it go to your head. I used to think love was something you earned through proof. I kept proving. Straight A's, a business plan at 19, a job offer from a firm my father respected. None of it registered. In that family, being right was never as valuable as being adored. The day they signed the company over to Marcus, my father called it practical. Marcus had a wife, a baby on the way, a family to provide for. I had always been fine on my own. That phrase followed me out the door, like a verdict. I didn't cry in the car. I remember that clearly. I just drove, and somewhere past the county line, I stopped looking in the rearview mirror. The insults were never shouted. They were quieter than that, which made them worse. There was the Thanksgiving. I flew home from my first real job, exhausted, proud only to hear my father ask Marcus about his golf handicap for 20 minutes before turning to me and asking, almost as an afterthought, "So, you're still doing the spreadsheet thing?" There was my mother's smile, thin, automatic, whenever I mentioned a promotion, followed immediately by a question about whether I was seeing anyone yet, as if success without a husband was an incomplete sentence. There was the family portrait on the mantel, updated every few years, where I stood a half step behind everyone else. I noticed it the way you notice a splinter. Small, easy to ignore until you press on it. The clearest memory is the dinner before the announcement. Marcus made a joke about my hobby business, the startup. I'd been building in secret, weekends and midnights, funded by nothing but my own savings. My father laughed. My mother refilled her wine. Nobody asked a single question about it. I remember setting down my fork very carefully, very quietly, and deciding I would never again explain myself to people who'd already decided who I was. The night it ended, my father called me into his study, the same room where he'd once taught Marcus to shake hands like a man, and never once asked me to sit in on a business conversation. He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing about my father. Cruelty in his hands was always delivered politely. "We've decided to restructure the estate," he said, sliding a folder across the desk like he was closing a deal. "The company, the house, it all goes to Marcus. He's got a family depending on him. You've always managed to land on your feet." I opened the folder. Read it once. I didn't argue, didn't ask why, didn't remind him that I was the one who'd audited the books last spring and quietly caught Marcus skimming from petty cash, a fact I'd buried out of some misplaced hope that loyalty might eventually be returned. I just closed the folder and said, "Okay." My mother looked relieved that I wasn't making a scene. I drove to the airport that night, with one suitcase and a business plan saved on an old laptop. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly what I was going to build, and exactly what I would do with it someday. The first year, I told no one my last name. I built under a shell company, funded by savings and a single angel investor, who cared more about my numbers than my pedigree. I studied contract law at night, not to become a lawyer, but to never again be the person who signed something without reading it twice. I hired an accountant I trusted completely, and had her quietly review every public filing. Voss Industries submitted, old habits. I still remembered the petty cash discrepancies I'd found at 23, the ones I'd buried to protect a brother who wouldn't have done the same for me. I didn't go looking for more. I simply kept the door open in case the numbers ever wanted to talk. By year 3, my company had acquired 2 of Voss Industries, smaller suppliers, and not out of spite, but because they were undervalued and I understood the sector better than anyone bidding against me. I never mentioned the connection. My board didn't know. My family definitely didn't know. By year 5, I sat on enough overlapping boards to see things most people couldn't. I didn't act on any of it. I just watched, patient. The way you watch weather building on a horizon, you know is coming your way eventually. So when they sat across from my desk 7 years later, I already knew why they'd come. The company's in trouble, my father said. He wasn't practiced at asking for things. It showed. Marcus made some decisions. The board's talking about a hostile buyer. We didn't know where else to turn. I already knew who the buyer was. I'd approved the offer myself 3 weeks earlier, through a holding company that bore no trace of my name. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I opened my laptop, turned the screen toward them, and let them read the acquisition filing themselves. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father went very still, the way people do when the floor they're standing on turns out to be a stage. You, he said. Me, I said. Though I imagine you'll want to ask Marcus about the petty cash discrepancies from 2019 before you ask me anything else. I have the audit, if the board wants it. I didn't need to raise my voice. The silence in the room did all the work I'd spent 7 years building toward. They left without the money. They left finally seeing me. The story broke quietly at first. A filing here, a whispered rumor at a shareholders' meeting there. Then Marcus's mismanagement became public, enough that the board voted him out within the month. My parents' name, once spoken with a certain reverence in those circles, started carrying a different weight. Not scandal exactly, just a quiet asterisk. My mother called twice. I let both go to voicemail, then finally answered the third, not out of forgiveness, but because I was curious what she'd say without an audience. She didn't apologize. She asked if I could help smooth things over with the board. Some patterns don't break just because the power shifts. I told her I'd think about it. I meant it too. Not because I owed them anything, but because I wasn't going to let old wounds turn me into someone who enjoyed watching people drown. Here's what stayed with me. Winning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from finally being believed without having to shout for it. If you've ever been the one who was underestimated, overlooked, told to wait your turn indefinitely, this part is for you. Proof isn't revenge. It's just the truth finally catching up. I think about that study often. The one where my father slid a folder across his desk and called it practical. For years I measured myself against that moment, wondering what I'd lacked, what I should have said, what version of me might have made them choose differently. I don't wonder anymore. Some people won't recognize what's in front of them until it stops needing their permission to exist. I didn't rebuild Voss Industries. I let the board bring in new leadership, stepped back from the acquisition once the restructuring was underway, and quietly donated my shares to a fund that trains first-generation founders, the kind of people who start with nothing but a spreadsheet and a stubborn refusal to quit. It felt like closing a loop rather than opening a new one. My parents and I speak sometimes, now, carefully, like people relearning a language they were never taught properly the first time. I don't know if it will ever be more than that, and I've made peace with the possibility that it won't. What I know is this. I stopped waiting for a family to see my worth the day. I built something they couldn't ignore. Turns out the quietest exit can echo the loudest.